It's so great to talk to you.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Just for context, Natalie worked here for a year. She did her internship, basically ending her college career, so her senior year, as a neuropsych research type internship, but it was also kind of an introduction to business. How would you explain it?
When I explain it to people that I go to school with, I can use the terms that we use here at school. So I can say I went on a Queen's undergraduate internship. But when I'm talking to anybody else, I say that I did an internship where I got to do knowledge translation. I was teaching people about the brain in a simple way. And then I also was doing data analysis as my two main roles. And that tends to be the way that people understand it. It was a cool program to get to do it while I was still in undergrad and get some life experience before I graduate.
You're really unique in the sense that you have a deep understanding of the brain and you've worked here. Because a lot of us have struggled so much, and then that kind of started our understanding of the brain. You're a little different. Tell me about your Neuropsych path. When did that start, and what was the progression of that?
I went to Monarch High School. There they offer science research seminar as an option science class in your senior year. So I took it. I'd been told my 8th grade year, there's this class, senior year of high school, you can take it. Since my freshman year, I had the track that I wanted to take this class, senior year of high school. And when I got there, I got to choose a professor to work with. I worked with Samantha Holden at the University of Colorado, Denver. We did research on Parkinson's disease that led to a publishable manuscript that was created. We were talking about communication abilities and quality of life. We had a poster that went to a conference in Nevada. At the end of the year, I was hooked. I was hooked on the whole neuroscience research thing. I was looking for schools that had neuroscience programs. I ended up at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, doing neuroscience research. Now I am in a lab doing neuroimmunology research and still on that neuroscience path.
Yeah, that's awesome. I actually knew Natalie in 8th grade. She was functioning in 8th grade, probably how I functioned close to 30. Understanding the big picture of her life and having planning and follow through and everything. It's always been fascinating to watch your path, and I'm super excited to see where it goes. We designed Untapped for the hyperactive boy, and that's not how things played out. We have so many very bright, high achieving students who are so intelligent, but they haven't had the structures to put everything together, or their anxiety has ramped up so high because they're so busy. You've always been on this AP, IB, very advanced track. What have you done to keep your anxiety low and able to stay on the path?
Well, first off, the reason that I was on that track was because my anxiety was not low. That's sort of how you end up in that high achieving is you tend to have a high fear of failure. It takes years to figure out how to do well without stressing yourself entirely out. Because in high school, I had the quite harmful mentality of if you're not about to have a panic attack over it, you're not going to do well on the test, which is not a great way to go into things.
It's such a good point because we think that's how we have to live.
If you're doing that all the time, you might be getting good grades, but you're not feeling good. You're in this high cortisol state, which is fight or flight, which is harmful to your body long term. It's actually damaging your blood vessels. You don't want to be at that high state of anxiety all the time. Now I have to consciously mitigate it, make sure that you set aside time to work on things, but also set aside time to not be working on things. A lot of times with our typical ADHD student that we work with at Untapped, you need to structure in the time that you're working on things so that we're somewhat having them in a forced way of doing their homework. For students like me, you have to do the opposite. You have to force breaks where you're not allowed to think about school because otherwise your brain is running at 1,000,000 miles an hour all the time and you're going to burn out. And that's what we see a lot of the time at Untapped is that burnout phase.
I love that you mentioned when you're built like you where you're uber driven, you have to treat your movement breaks. You have to treat your downtime. You have to treat studying for a test.
Exactly. There's also something that I have found the past couple years is guiltless breaks. Feeling like you can take a break without feeling bad about it. Valuing breaks as much as you value work. Because when you're really highly driven, you will feel bad for every break that you take because it's time that you're not spending on something productive. If you can let yourself have a guiltless break, you'll actually be more productive because you can focus again instead of just having your brain be totally wiped even after your break, and you'll have more fun and you can spend time with friends, and it's a good thing.
This weird correlation between being so driven and just being so anxious. And I think a lot of that too is even when you give yourself a little breathing room, you feel bad about it.
The issue with being highly driven and having a high anxiety state is that it works. You do these tests, you do your assignments, and you do well. So it reinforces it because you're like, oh, how do I know that if I take a break, I won't fail? Because you've never taken a break before, so you don't know what the outcome is going to be. I think testing it is really important because if you're like, what if I do take a break? Am I going to fail this test? Then you try it and then you don't fail the test. Then you start to recondition yourself out of that.
The reinforcement thing, just from my experience, is huge. We get so much positive reinforcement from getting that A, from making the varsity team, from whatever that is. If we can praise the break, we're doing a great service to our kids for the long game. You really reinforce the stress plus rest equals growth equation. I never really thought about it like that until I talked to you. Can you kind of explain how that works with studying and how you use this plus rest equals growth model?
Yeah, stress is an integral part of life. There is no way to say that stress is always a bad thing or stress is always a good thing. Stress is just part of it all. Your body needs a certain amount of stress to function, and that's okay. But your body can't function at a level of stress all the time. Like I was saying before with the cortisol levels. Cortisol is a stress hormone that's released at a normal level every day. You wake up with more, you go to sleep with less, and it keeps your body moving. It bumps up your blood pressure. It bumps up your heart rate. It's that feeling that's you're energized. And so it's important. And you do need that for studying. But if you have it all the time, if you don't have that rest, you're not going to be able to sustain it day after day. So if you actually want growth, you can't take the rest out because you need the cortisol to stay in this nice, happy level and not go too high or too low.
Another way you phrase it to me as well, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 1 is basically asleep and 10 is I've never focused harder in my life. You've talked before about how you try to get to 8 or a 9 on focus, but then you have to completely ease off. And that means not checking your phone or, get it back down to a 2 or a 3. And that's kind of how you structured your studying and your productivity. I always found that fascinating.
This is things that I'm trying out now as a student after being at Untapped for a year, because now I get to try it all out that I was applying on students okay, you sit down, you study pretty much maximum, as hard as you can. You are focused, you're dialed in, you're doing all the things you know you need to do. You've got your good music, you've got your same situation, you're dialed in. And then you stop, full stop. After a certain amount of time, you don't try to, I'll just do a little bit more while I'm eating dinner, because that's what I used to do is you can always do a little bit more, but actually stopping. And then when you come back to it, it feels so much better because you weren't half-heartedly studying. You were dialed in and then you were off and then you were dialed in again.
I use that all the time with these kids at these very high achieving, especially colleges, right? These pressure cookers, whether they're Ivy Leagues or darn close to it, or these really good, programs within these colleges. I always come back to that stress plus rest equals growth because that's just how we learn. So thank you for that. I've always found that fascinating. And going back to something else you said that's super important too is a little plug for Untapped. Like I know our mentors, we can't be full of it. We can't tell kids to do this or young adults and then not do it ourselves.
I have a pretty packed schedule between lab and school and the rest. And I have been scheduling in break times now because I used to see on your calendar, you would have thinking time Thursday mornings. And I've started doing that too, of like, block it out. You can't do anything else.
Some of the best thought leaders of our time, they actually scheduled in thinking time. And I know something that you and I always used to get blowback on is we'd work with kids who are creative. I don't need to have all these schedules because I'm an artist, I'm a painter, I'm a musician. I need to be creative. But when you read the biographies of who the most creative people were, the Picassos and the Da Vinci's of the world, like Picasso blocked out from 12 noon to 8 p.m. every single night to be in his lab and just think and work. And within those clear boundaries, creativity flourished. I think people like you and me, I just won't ever think, as weird as that is to sound, unless I actually have a thinking time on my schedule.
It's almost like having it blocked out gives you permission to do it. If it's on your schedule, you don't have to choose between 5 different things that you potentially have on your plate. You have the one thing that's on the schedule, and it's so calming to just know that you go at 2 p.m. and you work on that one thing. You don't even have to worry about the other things that you have that are floating around that you might have to work on because they're scheduled later. There's time for that. You only have to work on that one thing. It really calms you down.
We've noticed a lot of these very high achieving students that need the executive function help, whether it's independently or whether it's with a mentor, with a parent or whoever. They need this executive function support just as much as our scattered kids do. Let's say I am a 17-year-old high school student. I'm trying to get into all the name brand colleges. I have 6 AP classes. I'm volunteering. I'm a part of a varsity sport. Like, where would you start with that student? Their anxiety's through the roof. How would you help them?
The first thing I would ask them is why? Why are you wanting to go into this college? What's it going to do for you? That's the first thing. If it's because they want the name brand, then maybe they should be thinking about what they're actually looking for. If they're like, oh, this school has this great program, let's think about why you want to go into that program. Say it's engineering. Then you can say, why are you in all of these clubs, all of these organizations that have nothing to do with that? Let's focus things down a little bit. Let's maybe reduce some of the noise, because one of the things that I regret from high school is I was in 7 clubs and 4 AP classes my senior year. And I think I was president of 2 or 3 clubs. I did not need to be doing that. I could have cut a bunch of that out and set aside some time for myself, because one of the things that I wish I had blocked out in high school, I wish I had had the permission to block it out in high school, because I felt like I wasn't allowed to block out time for nothing, to just block in something for thinking about what things you actually value, what things you actually want to do, and then focusing your efforts towards that big goal and maybe cutting out some of the extra noise.
That is such a good point. That's the number one response that you and I hear once people make it through this time in their life. They look back and they're almost like, why did I do that? In my head, correct me if I'm wrong, it's due to a lack of planning, which sounds ridiculous because these people are uber planners, but it's not a lack of planning out their week or their day. It's a lack of planning out what their actual goal is and how do we reverse engineer that goal.
Also, I feel like there's a message that's communicated, especially in high schools, of if you're not doing everything, it's not good enough. You can't max out your college application. It's kind of this idea of you can always have more. I see that now with people that I know applying to med school. There's that same mentality of, oh, you can never have enough extracurriculars. But at the end of the day, I can think of maybe 3 core things that were big for me in senior year of high school that have translated onwards. And I feel like if I had known to focus more of my energy on those big things, it would have actually been more successful rather than trying to split my energy between a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah, and that gives me so much anxiety even hearing you say that. You can't max out an application. That ramps up my anxiety.
That was the inner monologue that was happening at that point in time.
So doubling down, tripling down, that is going as hard as you can in the thing you want to do and cutting out the noise. And that comes through planning. And a lot of times we need to get out of our head. So whether it's with a mentor, with a parent, executive function coach, therapist, it's figuring out what the value is and then reverse engineering what that goal is into the task you take to achieve that goal. And being very clear and purposeful is what I hear you say. One last thing I want to talk to you about. I've noticed that our uber high achievers, they have a ton of anxiety around studying because, like you said, you can't max out studying. So let's say I'm in a very challenging class, a class that would have never let me in, the Calculus 3 or something like that. So over 3 chapters of Calculus 3, the test, and we see our kids just spin nonstop. They don't know if they're prepared because there's no beginning, no ending for this studying for the test. What do you do? How do you coach these people?
What I would do is block in time for it. With some of our students, if you don't put a beginning on it, they will never start. With these types of students, if you don't put an end on it, they'll never stop. You need to have a cap. This was something that one of my professors said one time that has stuck in my head. She said, you have 100% for this year. And maybe your midterm, I took a midterm yesterday, it was worth 20%. That's 20% of the total. Most courses recommend that you spend 100 hours on that course for the year. So that factors in your time outside of class, your time in class, your time studying, your time looking up extra things about that class, 100 hours. You can think, okay, my test is worth 20%. That means I should have spent about 20 hours on that content. First off, you subtract all the time that you were in class learning the content, because that's already factored in. The remaining time you have is typically between 5 and 10 hours. And then that's how much time you need to study. So then you just block that in to different days throughout 2 weeks beforehand, an hour here, an hour there. And there you go. You've got your expected amount of time that you're supposed to spend studying for something.
It is so fascinating to talk to people who are so different than me, because it's like, that would never occur to me in a million years to mathematically look at this thing. So thank you. A few other interventions we've seen work for super high achievers who have a lot of anxiety around when to stop studying for a test. It's get out in front of it. Let's say there's a test on Friday and there's office hours on Wednesday. Get out in front of it and then go to your professor or go to your teacher, whatever that looks like, on those office hours and say, I've studied and I feel good about these concepts. What am I missing? Again, that gives you the permission to say, I have gaps here, or probably pretty good. That's one method we've seen. And then the other is the one pager, which I know you and I are both passionate about. It's taking all this information. If you can take 3 chapters of Calculus 3 and synthesize it, you understand that page, you have learned the material. And that's a nice, clear beginning and ending point.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing. That is my absolute favorite way to study for things. That is how I've passed the majority of my courses, is making those one pagers. And then the thing about one pagers is it's great to make them, but then you should have an interpersonal part with it as well. So once you have that one pager, you either hand that to someone else and you go, ask me anything off of this, and I should be able to tell you. That's a great way to know that you know it. That's the same as going to the office hours right before. It's the check-in to make sure that you writing it down actually got it to stick in your head. Or the other way of doing it that I have done before, if you don't have someone else to give it to, say it's exam season, all your friends are also in exams, there's no one else to give a piece of paper to. You read through your one pager, it's not that long, it'll take 2 minutes, and you read through and you phrase everything that you have on the one pager as a question in a voice memo. You go, what is the powerhouse of the cell? Then you don't say the answer. You leave all the blanks of the answers. Then you put your headphones in. This is what I used to do. You go on a walk around the block and you answer the questions to yourself.
That is a new one. I have not heard that one. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I love that one. That gives me a glimpse inside your brain when I see you just walking around the block at midnight.
Wouldn't do it at midnight, but yes.
Yeah,
you can do it days later because the recordings are still there, so you can continue to do it. And it doesn't take that long. It's typically maybe 2 to 5 minutes for a one pager.
I love that. And here's the true brilliance in the one pagers is when you get to final exam or, midterm or final exam season, let's say you have 6 chapters, which the final exam is over 12 chapters. You just have the one pager. And now you're just going off the one pager. And it's a great way to speed up your time studying, especially for the very busy person.
It saves you so much time when you get to the exam.
Thank you so much. Natalie, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for everything.